Welcome to the webinar. Today, if most of you, I guess, do not know that today is actually International Climate Change Day. Okay, so we are taking a little bit of a break from our usual marine theme and concentrating on alternate energies, starting with solar energy today. So we have also quite a few upcoming webinars, and these are all being presented by people who are quite well versed in the topic that they're going to be talking about. So it should be very interesting. As you can see, most of the themes are relating to the sea, since that is our forte and that's what we do. So a little bit about Coastal Impact, which is basically an NGO which was set up in 2009. For those who don't know, and we are involved primarily in marine conservation, research, and education. Okay, so that is our forte. Coming to this platform, which is now on your screen, and the program which is being done here is hosted by SSI, that is Scuba Schools International, and we are offering, they are offering quite a lot of courses which are relating to the environment, and even these are even for non-divers, and they are very, very competitively priced. You don't have to be a diver. You can just go on to divessi.com, and from there you can follow the links and sign up for these what we call dry courses, which does not involve any diving. So you have shark ecology, you have turtle ecology, manta and ray ecology, marine ecology, coral identification, etc. So you can also, if you're really interested in nature, then you can also buy this as a bundle at a much discounted price. Okay, so all this is on self-study. You'll be given a link to an e-manual you can read up, and there are quizzes. And at the end of it, there is probably also a exam. And then once you're done, then whichever dive center you choose to sign up with, in our case, it will be Barracuda Diving, and you can get certified in that particular specialty. This is where you can find the completed webinars. You can find us on YouTube, which with the entire webinar, if people have missed it today or have not been able to attend, will be posted on YouTube. So you can find us, and the link will be posted on our WhatsApp group, on Facebook, as well as on our website. So you can't get away. Please pass on these links to people who have missed it. And if they're interested in watching it, they can watch at leisure during their own time and without being bound by the time factor. Okay, so let me come on to Suneet. That's him. Nice smiling face. So I will now just go on to telling you a little bit about him. So Suneet has been working as an entrepreneur and a technical expert, and he has been throughout his career. His activities have always involved ideation to prototype, that is, he does the whole hawk, covering all aspects of the business. And he has been involved in designing an installation of rooftop solar PV systems for residential, industrial, and institutional end users under his partnership firm, which is called Solum Enterprises. The website, if you're interested, is solumenterprises.com. That is SOLUM enterprises.com. So now I'll let Suneet take over.
So I've tried to divide the presentation into these 4 parts. The first part, PV generation. Generation of photo. You're talking about the movie Current Wars recently that was released, which showed how Edison lost the race to Tesla. And therefore, although DC electricity bulb, which Edison made popular, is now a part of history until the LED lights have come into play just now. Tesla won that battle with the alternating current purely because of efficiency of generation. So Elon Musk has bought Tesla's patents and made them public. So basically Elon Musk's reverence for Nikola Tesla is the part where Elon Musk has spent his money in buying the patents which were in the name of Nikola Tesla and made them public for anybody to use. Now, solar electricity is generated only as DC, and presently the ecosystem does not support EC. It's all DC. It's all AC. That's basically because the generators at that time for DC were less efficient than the generators that Nikola Tesla made for AC. Now, that's why, I mean, the first electricity mega project was at the Niagara Falls, and therefore required a lot of transmission. So that's where we talk about the whole pattern of today, where you generate electricity in one location and need to transmit it over long distances. In case of solar, the game changer is that solar is distributed generation. So that is the big game changer just now. So if we look at why are we with AC, we briefly touched on that. Generation of AC is more efficient, so you have large scale generation. DC generation has great transmission losses. That means if you have to go to very high voltages, there is a problem. And if you are at low voltages, the losses are not economically viable. So is DC outdated? Is everything working on AC and therefore is DC outdated? No, actually, most of the equipment presently is expecting AC, but many of our new age efficient equipment, it's not just the small equipments like computers and mobiles that are using DC now, but even bigger equipments are now using DC because of technology. We are getting even simple things like water heaters, which would basically run on DC. But because the supply available is AC, conversion is done within the equipment for using as DC. If we are able to generate DC directly and use it directly, obviously that is the simplest way of using the available energy. If we are able to, for example, even harness lightning bolts, that generation is DC. We have just not found a way of harnessing that energy. Therefore, personally, I don't believe that DC is outdated. In fact, DC is now coming of age because of the different technologies. So then the question is, what is the cost to the environment? What are the wastages? What is the cost of manufacturing a panel? What kind of energy is used there? Right now, the photovoltaic panels have gone down to less than 20 rupees a watt. That is the cost of generation. Unfortunately, yes, most of these are made in China. And in the present situation, I do not know what would happen because we have either to buy the panels from China or from the US. These are the only two sources the world over for making the basic cell. But having got them at such a low price, the life expectancy of panels is about 25 years. In the present systems, the other option considered is chemical batteries, that is for storage, and the power electronics. These are the three broad components of the solar system today. You could use them in different patterns. You can eliminate the use of battery by combining it purely with the grid. But that's where we come to the distribution issues. Today we know only about the chemical batteries, but chemical battery need not be the only form of storage. We can store excess energy that is available when you don't want it into either heat or in types of mechanical storages. You could pump water to a height and use that as a gravity feed for non-solar hours. Also, the newer type of storage battery is the flywheel. Very high speed magnetic bearing flywheels are now available. They are yet to be scaled up to full size. So then these are actually the storage options which are not commonly looked at. Still people look at only chemical storage in batteries. So now the problem was about distribution. When we have huge amounts of energy to be distributed, these are the problems we need to overcome, especially when we are looking at it from an environmental cost. What would happen if transmission lines disappear. In today's context, we really don't look at the cost of transmission. Also, when we are talking about grid supply, there is a massive amount of energy balancing that is being done between production and consumption. Demand and supply situation, there is no storage. If we go to distributed generation, we completely eliminate transmission and we eliminate the need for big projects. Today, work from home has been forced down everybody. Most of your energy needs are going to be distributed. We are also looking at population migration back to the village, and nobody really is in a hurry to get back to the city. Because of this, the demand for energy in a concentrated location, city consumption of energy is going to change. That is what I mean by drop in energy demand density. Cities are very high in demand density, whereas rural areas are not so intense in energy demand. IoT and tech is forcing individuals to multitask, so it doesn't matter where you are. Work related to city commuting is being made redundant because everybody is working probably more hours from home. The energy consumption pattern will most certainly undergo a drastic change. So then what are the sources of energy that we are trying to replace with solar? This is broadly what we know as the sources of energy in the order of supply. I mean, the maximum supply is coming from thermal, and then by hydro, then by nuclear. These are the firm sources because they can be turned on and off on demand. Renewables have that disadvantage of not being available on demand. What kind of energy, if we have to look forward, are we looking for in about 10 years' time? So the first half is showing how much of electricity coverage we have got because of the recent force to send electricity to every last village. 99.7% of India is covered in terms of getting the network there. Presently, we have 370 gigawatts of installed capacity. 79% of that is from fossil fuels, and by the present projections, the demand for energy would be demand for installed capacity would be in the range of 700 gigawatts within the next 10 years. This estimate has been made on the basis of the targeted economic growth rate of 5%, which also we are not able to meet just now in the COVID scenario. So these are the two parameters that have been taken into consideration: the economic growth rate of 5% with the population at whatever rate it's growing just now. Now, is it seriously possible to get there in that time scale? This is the available information. We have a gap of about 400 gigawatts to be covered in 10 years, or else we accept a lower economic growth rate, and that is not politically tenable. No politician will ever accept that the growth rate, or other whatever effort he will have to put in, will be towards matching that growth rate. And if that growth rate has to be achieved, we need 400 gigawatts. Looking at the history of the top three energy sources we have just now: thermal, it will take 2 to 4 years for barely a gigawatt to be generated, installed capacity to be added. Hydroelectric, the largest in India, Koyna in Maharashtra, 2 gigawatts over the last 20 to 30 years. The biggest nuclear power plant, Kalpakam, 15 gigawatts, 5 to 8 years. Now, how do we get to 400 gigawatts in the next 10 years? Can we really get there? The only way possible is to go nuclear. Nuclear is the fastest. What kind of specs are we looking at of a nuclear power plant? It has to be bigger than everything put together just now, safer than the one that was in Japan. It has to be time tested more than what the Russians have ever done. It has to be commissioned faster than any other plant has been done, and it must have a lifetime that is reasonably infinite. So that's where we stand. Now, how can we do that? I'm concluding in conclusion, how do we get to hashtag Atmanirbhar? Couple of key things. A complete different thought process is required. Everybody must have the right to the sunlight that he's standing under. It sounds very logical, but presently that's not the case. The other aspect is make whatever you can when the sun shines. It's a take on make hay while the sun shines, but make whatever you can while the sun shines. When it doesn't, take a break. That's the only way we can balance this energy flow that is eternal. The key number over here is 1 kilowatt per square meter. That is what is available to everybody on the planet. That's all that we are entitled to. We really do not have a right to take more energy than 1 kilowatt per square meter.
All right. So Siddharth Raju is asking, isn't HVDC transmission supposed to have lower costs as compared to AC transmission?
Even if you say that high voltage DC transmission is cheaper than AC transmission, when you have distributed generation, there's no need for transmission at whatever cost.
No, I was inquiring about HVDC electrical losses. Though what you said is true that if you're using a distributed system of generation, that doesn't really matter. But isn't it now being considered even for longer transmissions to use HVDC?
It comes with its risks, and therefore that risk with technology has to be mitigated, and anything that needs to be done costs.
Okay, so it's not financially feasible right now.
No, it's not, especially for high power lines.
Okay, Suneet, I had one question, not question, really an observation. I don't know if you read the paper recently. There was something called anti-solar technology, which is being developed at Stanford University. And what they say is that one of the main limitations for solar right now, as we know, is that it can only be generated during the day because of the sun. But this technology is taking the differential between space and your local environment and generating electricity, which can be fed as direct current. And what they're saying is that they have already tried and tested that. They managed to run a single LED lamp throughout the night with this thing. Of course, it is still very much in developmental stage. But do you know about this technology, or do you have any idea about it?
No, I am not very well versed with this because I am presently focusing on how we can make available technology help us save the environment. Because the saving of the environment is a far more urgent, pressing matter just now. And yes, the technology will develop. Whenever DC is available, yes, the solar panel parts of it may change, but the management of the DC with power electronics and all that downstream will remain the same.
Okay. But I suppose, I mean, it will take probably a long time for them to get to a commercial stage where they will be able to.
Presently, the amount of electricity that can already be used for in DC through DC is enough to help us make a climate change difference. That's my thrust. If we are looking at all mobility being changed to electric vehicles, then the naysayers would first say that it's just a long tail pipe. You are going to use power from the grid, burn coal somewhere else, and then claim to use an electric vehicle in steam. That's not required. If you are having distributed generation, if you are using all the electricity that's available on your own rooftop, then you do not pass on your pollution to somebody else.
We should go back to being self-sufficient as a household or as a village at the most.
Yes.
So we don't
And
go
this is,
into
and
mega
this thing is
projects. Yeah.
distinctly possible. This thing is distinctly possible. I am staying in a 5,000 square feet area, and for my family, that is completely adequate. I do not require energy for mobility, for water management, and for communication and all these things for home use. I just don't need energy from outside. And if I can make it possible, the whole distribution business changes. And that's where democracy of electricity will come up. Presently, the power is in the hands of the distributor.
Right.
And then
Right.
he decides the price. If I'm falling short of energy, I should have the option to buy it from my neighbor or from Mr. Adani.
So actually, if you look at it, we are not really paying the actual cost of even thermal power right now, right?
Not at all.
As you said, because we are not taking into account the huge infrastructure cost.
Yes.
I think in our country, this can only be done by the government because they see it as a social cause, not as a profit-making thing.
If we are looking at the methods that are possible for the government to reach their declared targets, the only way they will do it is by ruining the environment.
Correct. Right.
They will install hydroelectric, they will install nuclear, they will install thermal. They will still not reach their targets. It is with all the efficiency of energy consumption that is coming into play, the energy demand is expected to peak in 10 years. After 10 years, we don't expect the energy demand to increase. I'm looking at the disaster that is in the making over the next 10 years. These are studies that are saying that with all the efficiency that is coming in into energy consumption, utilizing of all technologies, probably taking into consideration even the present COVID scenario where everybody starts social distancing or whatever. In all these scenarios, some of the studies are saying that in about 10 years, your energy demand will peak. Maybe not in 10 years, maybe in 20 years. In 20 years, you have peaked your energy, but you have taken 10 years to build the energy capacity for that, ruined the environment in the bargain, and then saying that it is redundant. If we spend our effort more towards the renewables in a sustainable manner, then if there is no demand, then the grid will not install more capacity because everybody is going on the basis of a demand.
I just wanted to inquire, in your last slide, you had said that we should utilize our 1 kilowatt per meter square of
Yes.
power that we're getting with that density. But in the case of urban
Yes.
areas, it becomes a little more challenging, even if you're looking at individual households. So you have multiple
Yes.
shading problems with tanks and different levels. And in addition to that, even if you do have a lot of space, if your sanction load is, let's say, only half of what you can install, then again, that is sub-utilizing. So that as an installer, despite the subsidies that are coming in for smaller systems up to 10 kilowatts, I believe that's what the last MNRE update was, up to 10 kilowatts, you do get subsidy still.
Yeah.
There is still an issue of getting net meters, especially in Delhi, Gurgaon.
Yes. My answer to that is, first of all, are we looking at the grid trying to support solar? These are the conflicts. Solar is distributed generation, whereas the whole idea of the grid is distribution. These are at economic loggerheads with each other. They will never make economic sense together. That's why forced conversion of solar to net metering is purely policy based. With policy, there is a limit. Your policy cannot change gravity. And that's what I was trying to indicate, that distribution is the cost. As far as urban challenges are concerned, urban challenges can be met because, I mean, everybody looks at tall urban glass facade buildings. Have you ever thought of putting solar panels on the vertical facade, there is massive amount of energy, especially above the 5th floor on east and west facing faces of high rises, which is being lost. There, the tall building can make use of the solar energy, and that's where my point about shadowing off your neighbor's sunlight. I mean, you have countries having international treaties about water distribution, where you cannot use the upper riparian state can't use the water that is the right of the lower riparian state. We will have to start thinking in that direction. For sunlight, that is your right.
You bring up this point about the loggerhead between the distributor and the solar generation anyways, but
Yes.
could you comment on power purchase agreements? Again, like you said, that's a policy and that won't change a lot, but still, because it is part of policy and it is being enforced, at least in Delhi, it was being enforced that all housing societies, I believe
Yes.
SES was trying to get a lot of housing societies to install solar on their rooftop in order to meet their renewable purchase agreements. So,
Right. So when we talk about power purchase arrangements, these are supposed to be held for 20-25 years. Now,
yes,
there are already examples in which somebody has installed 5 megawatts with a price of 5 rupees per unit for 25 years. And technology has changed, and electricity is available at 2 rupees 90 paise today. Now the government is asking the 5 megawatt installer to renegotiate the price. The government is right because they can get new 5 megawatts at 2 rupees 90 paise. The installer is right. 5 years ago, he installed it at 5 rupees for 25 years. Now, where do you bring these two on the same page? It's impossible. And the person who has installed with a power purchase agreement signed for 25 years is now making trips only to the courts to defend his power purchase agreement rather than installing more solar. If today somebody has signed something at 2 rupees 19 paise, 19 gigawatts, and tomorrow the prices change or the demand changes. If you and I start installing and demand changes, what happens to that 19 gigawatts installed in Tamil Nadu? Nobody is being able to commit a power demand 20 years on the road. And when that changes, all hell breaks loose because nobody has, it is, whose money is it? They would give the generator money only that the consumer would pay. If there is no consumer, what is that installed capacity for? Today also there is the ridiculous situation on the technological front where the grid, and that's where I was talking about balancing of power in a grid, where the grid technically is legitimate in asking a projection for what kind of power they will, a given generator will supply in the next 1 hour. Try to tell that to a solar plant or a wind plant that can you tell me what is the amount of energy you are going to give to the grid in the next 1 hour within a tolerance of 5%. And if you don't do that, you're going to be penalized. These are the odds that people who have signed power purchase agreements are living with. Now look at it the other way. Let's say that everything is made nice for the renewable energy on the grid. And the government did that. And they said that you cannot refuse any power being given by a renewable energy source. Then somebody has to back off. If the demand at that instant is not as much as the supply, somebody has to back off. And the only person who can back off is the coal plant. The coal plant can be shut off as such, but that adds to cost. Coal plants are viable only if they have 70% plant load factor. With solar, the way it has kicked in just now, has made that plant load factor drop down to less than 60%. You then have to pay the coal power plant not to produce so that they can produce when you want it. For a 600 megawatt coal plant to shut down and start, it takes 4 hours. So you can't just ask him to switch on and off. I really envy, I pity the guy who has to do that switching on and switching off. And it is a cost. Even not running that plant is a cost. Who's going to pay that cost? when you are when the government is asking thermal power plants to improve their, okay, give us a price rise in unit rate of electricity. You want to keep it shut down, then the remaining electricity that we sell to you, the price goes up. Anything related to the grid and balancing will only drive costs up. Only if you are self-sufficient in your neighborhood. It doesn't have to be you alone. Your neighborhood,
Yeah.
microgrids, self-sufficiency of the rooftops in the neighborhood is going to be the way forward if we want to avoid climate change. Government will go according to data that is available, and data is only available for thermal, hydro, and nuclear. One company has a gas plant for 2 gigawatts in one part of the country, and another part of the country has 19 gigawatts of solar power, both feeding to the grid. Now, the same man controls from where he supplies the energy. You are still going to pay whatever price he asks for. You have no control over the price, be it solar, be it gas. And that one person will be deciding whether he wants to supply you gas power or solar power based on his convenience. So that's what I meant by democracy of power distribution is possible only in distributed generation. And even simplified further, why should I pay you for something that's landing on my head?
Okay, Rohanna's got a question, I think. How are solar power cells recycled?
So basically, solar cells today, by today's technology, are made predominantly of silica. Silica is basically sand, and you crush all that glass and silica together, it makes sand. It is a perfect construction material. You can make it into aggregate and use it in road building or construction, any which way you like, as you would use sand. You're already having problems with sand from or river sand or sea beach sand for construction, related to sand itself in construction business. So probably this is one source. Just 25-year cycle, destroy it, and 25 years later, it would be something even simpler. It is going to get only easier and more efficient than what it is today. But let's assume that it remains as inefficient as today. Then every 25 years, you will have a large amount of glass and silica to crush and make available to construction.
But what about the source itself for manufacturing the cells? That is still being mined, right? It is not made from sand.
No, it is about sand, but it is about problem at the manufacture of the solar cell is the energy cost.
Right.
What kind of energy are you using to make that silica as pure as it is required to be? And that today, China is making it real cheap by burning coal. So they're burning a lot of coal and using that electricity to make solar panel cells. That is a problem that can be addressed differently. And yes, if you have solar cells making that power, which is possible now, then it becomes a full loop.
But then the raw material itself is mined, am I correct?
The sand, SiO2 is the source. Yes, it has to be picked out of some kind of sand, but it's not like lithium where you have to go to Bolivia and mine in a particular place. Sand is available everywhere. Whatever is the worst possible sand, you need to heat and purify.
Because I recently saw a documentary on which they said that this, getting it from sand is not viable because of the purity factor. That's why they were mining the silica and then doing it, making it from that.
Correct. But it's a matter of energy cost. It all boils down to energy. In terms of renewables and solar photovoltaic is 20% of the 1 kilowatt that's available. 60% is solar thermal. But that technology is still not viable on the individual use. Again, go back to generation and distribution.
I have a question about these microgrids. Generally speaking, there are two scenarios in my mind about the microgrids. One where you're using it on, or let's say in a rural area where your power demand is not significant. And so in this case, let's say even if you're using half a kilowatt per household, and there are 10 households. So then that comes to 5 kilowatts. And then the battery bank is significantly smaller for these because you need to back it up. Because out of the 365 days of the year, only 300, 320, even if I was to extend it, you will have sunlight. And to produce battery banks or a backup which would last longer than 3 days is, in terms of the actual calculation of how many batteries you need, is a huge amount. Which also adds to cost as well. Are you recommending an on-grid system, which again would then be subject to the availability of the grid?
So, first of all, when we are using solar without the grid, it is not necessary that we have to have a battery. There are many installations that I am doing just now where battery is just not a compulsory part of the system. Yes, you will then live with the vagaries of what is available from the sun, and you will have it between a particular time slot, between 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. in varying amounts. But I think there is a small misconception that when you are talking about off-grid, battery is a compulsory component. Battery is a compulsory component if you want to use it during non-solar hours. If your work or whatever your energy consumption, for example, in the fields, if you are going to have any of those mechanical tractors or combine harvesters or threshers or whatever, all that equipment can be or does not need storage. Water pumping, water management completely can be done without batteries, purely on solar. So I am not recommending for a grid-tied system at all. I mean, that would be my ideal way forward. But that would mean that you would need to have that kind of area available, which in rural environment is not difficult.
No, I concur. So what you're saying is, of course, solar powered pumps, etc., are a big deal, and lots of policies, etc., and even installations have occurred. But again, in this case, the household needs, what you're saying is 7 to 6, and at night, what are they doing? And more importantly, during the monsoons, what is happening then? Where are they supplying their power from?
Okay, so typically in a rural environment, nobody I'm being straightforward and honest. I've gone to a couple of campsites where I am installing some water pumps as well. Nobody really requires electricity for a television. Nobody requires a refrigerator. Nobody requires a what do you say, a microwave or some such thing. But even if one were to factor a basic refrigerator and today's LED TVs, the simple battery that is available, a car battery, is more than enough for a household in a rural environment. So there is no storage issue. Entire energy management is done predominantly during the day. Insignificant amounts of energy are required for the night, which are easily backed up by a simple 12-volt car battery. Incidentally, I'll take the opportunity to introduce a newer type of battery. We know about lead-acid batteries. We know about lithium-ion batteries. We also have a new type of battery coming in. You may Google it. It's a carbon polymer battery, which works as a supercapacitor as well. These are also now being readily available. They are possible to be made with local material in India. And the people who are manufacturing this are willing to replace the battery at 70 by giving you a buyback of 70% of what you have paid for it. If you have paid $100 for a battery, 5 years down the road, they are willing to buy it back from you for $70 because they are confident about how much they can recycle within that battery.
And are there any limitations to that as compared to other lead acid and other batteries?
In fact, these carbon polymer batteries are a step between lead acid batteries and lithium-ion batteries. All said and done, lithium-ion performance has not been matched, and therefore nothing other than lithium-ion is used in cars. But the issue about lead-acid batteries is the rate at which you can charge them. Even if you have a lot of solar energy on top, a 100 ampere hour battery, a typical one that you have in the car, can't be charged by more than 25 amps. So it would take 4 hours to charge. But a carbon polymer battery with 100 ampere hours can be charged with 400 amperes. So you can do it in 15 minutes. So if you have the solar, you can tank up your battery in 15 minutes. So these are the changes that are evolving in the storage part of renewables. And these batteries cost probably 15 to 20% more than lead acid batteries. Most certainly way cheaper than lithium ion. I'm working with the manufacturer on these. So these are in test with us just now on 2 or 3 of our systems installed on site.
Great. Thank you so much, Suneet.
Okay, my
Wonderful
pleasure.
having you here. Learned a lot.
Okay.
Very interesting. So
Right.
we'd
I
like
hope
to
I
thank.
was able to give food for further thought.
Definitely, you did. You did indeed. And it's interesting to see the new emerging technologies and where they will take us in the future. More people becoming more aware
Yes.
and demanding, because demand is what drives it.
Okay.
So join us for the next webinar, which is on 28th of June on alternate energy forms. And also thanks to SSI
Thank you.
for hosting us. Thanks you guys for attending it and staying with us till the end. So we'll see you at the next one. Good night all.